The hand came from nowhere. Fingers hooked under the edge of her mask and yanked. Zara's head snapped sideways. Her tray of champagne flutes crashed to the marble floor, glass exploding in every direction. The man, drunk, red-faced, grinning like he'd just won a bet, held the flesh-colored medical mask in his fist and waved it above his head like a trophy. "Let's see what the freak is hiding," he shouted. The crowd at the rooftop bar turned. Every pair of eyes locked on Zara's face. She spun away fast, both hands flying to cover her nose, her cheeks, her chin. Her back hit the bar counter. Her chest heaved. The room tilted under her feet. Cold air stung the skin she hadn't exposed in 4 years. Someone nearby lifted a phone. The camera flash popped white. Then another. Then 3 more. "Oh my God," a woman whispered, loud enough to carry. What happened to her face? Laughter rippled from the drunk man's table. His friends doubled over, slapping the table, tears in their eyes. One of them pointed at her like she was an exhibit in a zoo. "Bro, put it on Instagram. This is gold." Not one person in the room moved to help. Not the bartender who'd served her water on her breaks. Not the other servers who ate lunch beside her in the break room. Not the security guard leaning against the wall with his arms folded. Zara's throat tightened. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let a single tear fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Now hold on. Before we go any further, if you're new to this channel, welcome to Afro-Korean Narratives. You're about to ride through one of the most intense stories we've ever told. So go ahead, tap that subscribe button, hit the bell so you never miss a drop, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to it. The mask landed at her feet. The drunk man had tossed it like trash. Zara kept one hand pressed against her face, dropped to her knees, snatched the mask with the other, and pressed it back into place with shaking fingers. The elastic snapped against her ears. She stood. She picked up the tray. She walked to the kitchen. She did not run. She would not give them that. Behind the steel doors of the kitchen, she set the tray on the counter and gripped the edge until her knuckles went pale. Her whole body trembled. The head chef glanced at her, then looked away. 2 servers whispered near the walk-in cooler, eyes darting toward her and back. Nobody asked if she was all right. The next morning she found a note taped to her locker. Block letters on a torn piece of receipt paper. "Take the mask off or find another job. You're creeping out the clients." She peeled it off, folded it once, and put it in her pocket. That was the 4th note this month. That was 3 months ago. 3 months before the night everything changed. 3 months before Kang Seo-jin turned her life inside out. But to understand that night, you need to understand how Zara ended up wearing a mask in the first place. And for that we go back. Not far. Just far enough to meet the woman who burned her. Zara grew up in a row house in East Baltimore. Her mother, Lorraine, died in a car accident when Zara was 7. After that it was just her and her father, Curtis. Curtis worked double shifts at the port. Came home smelling like diesel and salt water. His hands were always cracked and rough, but when he held Zara's face between them every night, they were the gentlest things in the world. "You got your mama's face, baby girl. That face is gonna open doors the world tried to lock on us." And he was right. Zara was beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful that needed makeup or filters or good lighting. The kind that made strangers stop mid-sentence. High cheekbones that caught shadows like sculpture. Deep brown skin that held light like polished wood. Wide-set eyes that made people feel seen when she looked at them. Full lips that curved naturally into something close to a smile even when she wasn't trying. Teachers called her striking. Neighbors called her Lorraine's ghost. Curtis called her his miracle. Curtis raised her alone for 9 years. Then he met Denise Thornton at a church fish fry. Denise was a widow with a daughter named Monique, 1 year older than Zara. Denise smiled wide and laughed loud and called Curtis baby before the 3rd date. She told Zara she'd always wanted 2 daughters. She braided Zara's hair on Sunday mornings and packed her lunch for school with little notes inside. Hearts and smiley faces drawn in red ink. Zara believed every word, every touch, every promise. Curtis married Denise 6 months later. For 2 years the house felt full and warm. Monique and Zara shared a room. They fought over the bathroom mirror and borrowed each other's clothes and whispered about boys from school until midnight. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to feel like family. Then Curtis had a stroke at the loading dock. dead before the ambulance crossed the bridge. He was 44. Zara was 18. The funeral was on a Tuesday. By Friday, the woman Denise had pretended to be was gone. The soft voice turned sharp. The warm hands turned rough. The little lunch notes disappeared. Zara became the one who cooked, cleaned, washed, ironed, and mopped. Monique became the one who sat on the couch and pointed at spots Zara missed on the floor. But the worst part wasn't the chores. The worst part came 3 days after the burial. Zara was asleep in her bed when she felt the hands pin her down. Her eyes flew open. Denise straddled her chest, one knee on each arm. Her weight crushed the air from Zara's lungs. In her right hand she held a rag soaked in something that stung Zara's nostrils before it touched her skin. "Nobody," Denise whispered, pressing the cloth against her face with both hands now, grinding it into her skin, "is ever going to look at you again." The chemical burned through the first layer of skin in seconds. Zara screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. Denise told them the girl had spilled bleach on herself while cleaning the bathroom. They believed her. Why wouldn't they? Denise was a churchwoman, a grieving widow, and Zara was just a teenager with no parents and no one to call. The burn took Zara's face and rebuilt it into something she couldn't recognize. Raised scars like melted wax ran from her hairline to her chin. The left side pulled tight where the skin had tried to heal itself, twisting her features into something uneven and raw. Her lips scarred shut on one side. Her left nostril collapsed slightly. Every morning she looked in the mirror. She saw what Denise had created. A stranger staring back with her mother's eyes trapped in a face that no longer looked human. And every week, every single week for the next 2 years, Denise sat her down and rubbed a thick dark paste into the wounds. "This will help it heal," she said with that same churchwoman smile. It didn't help. It was poison. A mixture Denise bought from a man who sold chemicals out of a storage unit on Route 40. It kept the scars inflamed, kept the skin raw, kept the tissue from regenerating, kept Zara trapped behind the medical mask Denise ordered from a supply catalog. Flesh-colored, clinical, covering everything from the bridge of her nose to her chin. "Wear this always," Denise told her. "The world doesn't need to see what you are." Zara wore it. She wore it to sleep. She wore it in the shower. She wore it until she forgot what her real face looked like. By 22, she had stopped looking in mirrors altogether. For years later, Zara stood in the service elevator of a 50-story building on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Her cleaning cart rattled as the elevator climbed. Bucket, mop, spray bottles, folded rags. The tools of a life she never planned. She worked as a maid in the private penthouse of Kang Seo-jin. She had never met him. Not once. In 7 months on the job, she'd never seen his face in person. She knew his name from the whispers of the other staff. She knew his reputation from the way security moved when his name was mentioned. How their spines straightened, how their voices dropped, how their phones disappeared into their pockets. Kang Seo-jin, the head of the Kang Syndicate, one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. Korean-born American Maid. His family had come to New York when he was 12. His father built the syndicate from a single shipping container in Red Hook. Seo-jin inherited it at 25 when his father's heart gave out in the middle of a board meeting. In 11 years, he turned his father's operation into something the old man wouldn't recognize. His operation controlled shipping lanes, construction contracts, nightclub territories, and half the real estate between Midtown and the Bronx. People in his world used words like untouchable and ghost because he rarely appeared in public and never appeared in photographs. Zara didn't care about any of that. She cared about 3 things: her paycheck, her silence, and keeping the mask on. The penthouse was empty most days. Seo-jin traveled constantly: Seoul, Los Angeles, Miami. When he was home, Zara was scheduled for night shifts, cleaning after he left for his offices downtown. She moved through his world like a shadow. Invisible. Just the way she wanted it. Monique had gotten her the job. That was the part that ate at her quietly, like a slow leak she couldn't find. 7 months ago, Monique had called out of nowhere. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. "Sis, I found you something. A real job. Good money. A penthouse on the Upper East Side. All you gotta do is clean." Zara should have known better. Monique never called to help. Monique called to position. What Zara didn't know then was that Monique worked as a hostess at one of Seo-jin's nightclubs downtown. A place called Venom. Black walls. Gold lights. Bottle service that started at 10,000 a night. Monique wasn't just working there. She was hunting. She wanted Seojin. Not the man. The money. The power. The name. She wanted to be Mrs. Kong, and she'd been engineering every detail of her life to make it happen. Monique needed Zara close, not to help her, but to keep her beneath her. A scarred, masked maid scrubbing floors while Monique danced in borrowed heels 3 blocks away. The same arrangement they'd had since childhood. Monique shining. Zara hidden. The only difference was the zip code. Zara stepped off the elevator into the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the space in a panoramic view of Manhattan at night. The city glittered below like a circuit board. The air smelled like sandalwood and cold leather. She pushed the cart forward and got to work. Wiped down the glass tables. Vacuumed the Persian rug. Polished the black granite bar top where a single whiskey glass sat with one finger of amber still in it. He'd been here recently. She could feel it. The warmth hadn't left the room yet. She moved to the study. Dark wood shelves lined with books in Korean, English, and French. A framed photograph sat on the corner of the desk. Seojin and an older woman, her hand on his shoulder, both unsmiling but unmistakably connected. His mother, Zara, guessed. Same sharp jawline. Same serious eyes. She dusted the frame without picking it up. Then something caught her eye. A folded note on the desk, half tucked under a leather portfolio. She didn't read it. She never read his things. But the words at the top were large enough to catch without trying. The gala, final guest list. She moved on. Cleaned the bathroom. Restocked the towels. Scrubbed the kitchen until the stainless steel gleamed. By 11 she was done. She packed the cart, rode the elevator down, and stepped into the cold Manhattan night. Her breath fogged through the mask. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the subway. That was her routine. Every night. Clean his world. Leave no trace. Go home to a studio apartment in Washington Heights where the radiator clanked all night, and the ceiling leaked when it rained. But tonight something was different. Her phone buzzed. A text from Monique. Big news tomorrow. Seojin's making an announcement at the club. Every woman in his circle is losing their mind. This is my moment, sis. Don't mess this up for me. Then a second message. And don't even think about showing up anywhere near the gala. Stay invisible. Zara stared at the screen. She didn't respond. She slipped the phone into her coat and disappeared underground. The next morning, the news hit every corner of Seojin's world. A gala. Invitation only. Hosted at the Meridian, a restored cathedral in Tribeca that Seojin had purchased and converted into his private event hall. Stone arches. Stained glass. A ceiling painted with gold leaf. The invitations were handwritten on black cardstock with gold ink. One line read, Mr. Kong Seojin requests the pleasure of your company for an evening of significance. That was it. No details. No explanation of what significance meant. But everyone knew. Seojin was choosing a wife. The Kong syndicate needed an heir. Seojin was 36, unmarried, and his mother had been pressing him for years. His father had died without seeing a grandchild. The elders in his organization had started saying it out loud. A man with no family was a man with no future. Word reached Monique before the invitations went out. She called Zara 3 times before noon. Zara picked up on the third. He's choosing a wife, Monique said, breathless. At the gala. Everyone's talking about it. Every woman who's ever been within 10 feet of him is getting an invitation. Good for them, Zara said flatly. Good for me, Monique corrected. I've been working that club for 8 months. I've been in his building. In his orbit. This is what I've been building toward. Zara listened. She didn't respond. She'd learned years ago that Monique didn't want conversation. She wanted an audience. And listen, Monique's voice dropped low. When I become Mrs. Kong, things change for you too. Better job. Better apartment. Maybe I'll even get you a real doctor for that face. The line went quiet. Then Monique laughed. Short. Sharp. The kind of laugh that had a blade in it. I'm kidding. Sort of. Just stay in your lane, Zara. Clean the penthouse. Keep the mask on. This is my night. The call ended. Zara sat on the edge of her bed. The morning sun cut through the window and hit the mask. She reached up and touched the edge where it pressed against the bridge of her nose. She hadn't taken it off in front of another person in 4 years. She didn't know the gala had anything to do with her. She didn't know the man whose floors she scrubbed was about to change her entire life. She didn't know any of it yet. But she was about to. 2 days before the gala, Kang Seojin sat in the back office of Venom. The bass from the club floor pulsed through the walls like a second heartbeat. Blue light leaked under the door. A half-empty bottle of soju sat on the desk between 2 untouched glasses. Young-soo stood across from him, arms folded, leaning against a filing cabinet. Young-soo was built like a refrigerator, wide shoulders, thick neck, flat expression that never changed whether he was ordering bibimbap or ending a negotiation. He'd been Seojin's second-in-command for 11 years. Trusted him with his money, his secrets, his life. "You sure about this?" Young-soo asked. Seojin leaned back in his chair. His suit jacket hung behind him, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The scar that ran from his right ear to his jaw caught the blue light and looked almost silver. "My mother married my father because he was powerful," Seojin said. "She spent 30 years next to a man she respected but never loved. When he died, she didn't cry. She reorganized his files. I sat in the hallway and watched her through the crack in the door. She moved his papers into labeled folders for 3 hours. Never shed a tear." He poured soju into one glass without drinking. 3 decades of performing a marriage. That's what power attracts. Performance. Young-soo said nothing. He knew when Seojin was thinking out loud, and when he wanted a response. "I'm not doing that," Seojin continued. "I'm not choosing a woman who sees a crown and builds her smile around it. I want to see what people do when they think no one important is watching. When there's nothing to gain." "So you want me to go to the gala?" Young-soo said slowly. "As you." Seojin nodded. "Same suit. Same table. Same authority. Nobody outside this room has seen my face clearly enough to know the difference. You sit where I sit. You dance. You let every woman believe she's performing for the man who holds the keys. And where will you be? Testing hearts." Young-soo exhaled through his nose. "You're going to dress like a nobody." "I'm going to dress like the kind of person everyone pretends doesn't exist. And if someone recognizes you? No one looks at the face of a man with nothing. That's the whole point." Young-soo straightened up. "This is either the smartest thing you've ever done or the dumbest." "Probably both," Seojin said. He picked up the glass and drank. The plan was set. Young-soo would attend the gala as the face of the Kong Syndicate. Every woman in the room would perform for him, believing they were auditioning for the most powerful man on the East Coast. Meanwhile, Seojin would spend the evening before the gala on the streets near the venue. Dirty clothes, no security, no name. Just a man with nothing, watching what the world did when it thought nobody was keeping score. The night before the gala, Seojin put the plan into motion. He changed in a parking garage 6 blocks from the Meridian, while Young-soo watched with the expression of a man babysitting a billionaire's bad idea. Seojin stripped off the charcoal suit and folded it onto the hood of the car. He pulled on torn jeans from a thrift store on Canal Street. A stained gray hoodie with a rip along the left shoulder. Boots with the soles separating from the leather. He rubbed dirt on his hands and neck. Smeared grime across his jaw to obscure the scar. Messed his hair until the silver streak at his temple was hidden under a grimy baseball cap pulled low. Gembinsing, Jeongsu Materth. Seojin grabbed a paper cup, dropped a few coins in it, and walked out into the night. He positioned himself in the alley behind the Meridian, right next to the service entrance, right where the staff took out the trash. He sat on the concrete, back against the cold brick wall, head down, paper cup in front of him. And he waited. Over the next 3 hours, 46 people passed him. He counted everyone. Club staff adjusting their earpieces as they stepped around him. Delivery drivers with their eyes fixed ahead. Women in heels cutting through the alley, their pace quickening as they got close. Not one stopped. Some stepped over his legs without looking down. One man muttered, "Get a job," without breaking stride. A woman pulled her purse tighter and walked faster. Then, just before 10, the side door of the Meridian opened, and a group of women spilled into the alley. Staff from the upper floor, done with their shift. Among them was a voice he would remember for the rest of his life. Sharp, loud, dripping with self-importance. Monique Thornton. She was dressed in a black bodycon dress, hair pressed bone straight, nails painted gold. She stopped when she saw him. Not out of concern. out of disgust. Her face twisted like she'd smelled something rotten. Oh hell no. There's a whole bum sitting right next to the entrance. She stepped closer. Seo-jin kept his head down. Jo. Move. He didn't move. I said move. She kicked his cup. Coins scattered across the wet concrete. One of her friends laughed. The other lifted her phone and started recording. Monique leaned down close enough for him to smell her perfume. Something expensive she couldn't afford on a hostess salary. Get away from this building. You're disgusting. You're killing the vibe for the gala tomorrow. Nobody wants to see this. If I see you here when I come back, I'm calling someone to drag you out by your neck. She straightened up, flipped her hair, and turned to her friends laughing like she'd told the funniest joke of her life. Her heels clicked against the alley floor, fading into the night noise of Tribeca. Seo-jin sat still. He picked up the coins one by one from the puddle, placed them back in the dented cup. His face showed nothing, but his mind filed every word, every gesture, every inflection. He had a memory like a vault, and Monique Thornton had just locked herself inside it. It was almost midnight when the service door opened again. This time the sound was quieter. No heels clicking, no laughter, just the low groan of a heavy metal door, and the scrape of a trash bag against concrete. Zara stepped into the alley pulling 2 oversized garbage bags behind her. She wore her gray uniform, wrinkled from 6 hours of bending and scrubbing. The plain headwrap covered her braids. The mask sat tight across the lower half of her face. Her back ached. Her fingers were pruned from bleach water that had seeped through the gloves the building was too cheap to replace. She hauled the bags to the dumpster, swung them over the edge, and turned back toward the door. That's when she saw him. A man slumped against the brick wall. Torn clothes. Dirty cap pulled low. A paper cup tipped on its side, coins scattered around it like someone had kicked it recently. He wasn't moving much. Just a slight rise and fall of his chest and a slow trembling in his hands. Most people would have walked past. 46 already had. The alley was dark. The man was a stranger. And Zara had learned that the world didn't reward kindness, it punished it. Her father had been kind. He'd married Denise because he believed kindness was contagious. It wasn't. It was a target. But her feet didn't listen to her brain. They carried her forward until she was standing in front of him. She knelt. The concrete was cold and wet through her uniform pants. Hey, she said softly. You okay? He lifted his head just enough for her to see cracked lips and dirt on his jaw. He shook his head slowly. When's the last time you ate? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Stay here. She disappeared through the service door. The kitchen was empty. Night crew had clocked out. She grabbed leftover pasta from the staff fridge, a bottle of water, 2 packets of crackers, a napkin and a plastic fork. She hesitated. The food wasn't hers. If the kitchen manager found out, it'd come out of her paycheck. But the man outside was shaking. And Zara knew what shaking from hunger felt like. She'd lived on 1 meal a day for 2 years in Denise's house. She remembered the way her hands trembled by evening, the way her stomach eventually stopped growling and just went quiet, like it had given up asking. She grabbed the food and went back outside. She knelt again and set the container beside him, opened the water and placed it in his hand, wrapping his fingers around it because his grip was weak. It's not much, but it's warm. He looked at the food, then at her. His eyes were sharper than she expected. Even under the grime, something behind them was alert, focused. She didn't notice. She was too busy balancing the fork on the edge of the container. Eat slow, she said. If you haven't had food in a while, your stomach's gonna cramp if you rush. He took a bite, then another. She sat on the concrete beside him, not across from him, beside him, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his, like he was a person, not a problem. They sat in silence while he ate. When he finished, he set the container down and turned to her. Why? His voice was low, rough but steady. Why what? Everyone else walked past tonight. 46 people. Some cursed at me. One woman kicked my cup. He paused. Why did you stop? She pulled her coat tighter. Because I know what it feels like when nobody stops. When you're right there, in plain sight, and people look through you like you're not real. I know what that does to a person. He looked at her. Not at the mask. Not at the uniform. At her. You're wearing a mask, he said. Not a question. A statement. Zara stiffened. Her hand floated toward her face, the reflex she couldn't control. Fingers pressing the edges of the mask, making sure it was in place. I have my reasons, she said quietly. I wasn't asking for the reason, he said. I was noticing the courage. Nobody had ever called the mask courageous. Ugly. Weird. Creepy. Sut. Those were the words people used. One date. Her only attempt in 4 years had lasted 11 minutes before the man said he couldn't look at her and left cash on the table. Courage. The way he said it made her chest tight in a way she didn't understand. What's your name? He asked. She stood up, brushed the grit off her knees. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. You don't know me. You just fed a stranger in an alley at midnight, sat next to him on cold concrete, told him to take small bites so his stomach wouldn't cramp. He paused. I know enough. Something shifted inside her chest. A tiny crack in the wall she'd spent 4 years building around every soft thing she had left. She felt the warmth leak through. She sealed it shut immediately. I have to get back. My shift's almost over and I still need to mop the east hallway. She turned toward the door. Her hand reached for the handle. She pulled it open. The fluorescent light from the hallway cut a sharp white rectangle across the dark alley. In that one careless second, as she stepped through the doorframe, the elastic strap of her mask caught on the rough edge of the metal door handle. It snapped loose on the left side. The mask dropped away from half her face, hanging by the right strap like a broken hinge. She gasped. Her hand flew up, but a heartbeat too slow. For 1 full second, maybe 2, the left side of her face was bare. The raised scars from hairline to jaw. The tight, twisted skin where the chemical burn had fused the tissue. The collapsed nostril. The lip that pulled sideways, frozen in a shape that wasn't hers. The fluorescent light caught every ridge and valley. Every line that Denise's poison had carved into the face Curtis had called a miracle. She heard his breath catch behind her. Not a gasp of horror. Not the sharp inhale of disgust she'd heard 100 times. Something else. Something quieter. Something that sounded less like shock and more like recognition. She pressed the mask back into place with trembling hands, and stepped through the door without looking back. It clicked shut. She leaned against the hallway wall, eyes closed, chest heaving. He saw. He saw and he didn't make a sound. No gasp. No curse. No footsteps running the other direction. Just that breath. That single, quiet breath that carried something she'd never received from another person after the mask came off. She didn't know why the absence of cruelty hit her harder than cruelty ever had. She didn't know the man in that alley owned the building she was leaning against. She didn't know she'd just fed Kong Seojin his first honest meal in 11 years. And she didn't know that in 48 hours, he was going to walk past every beautiful woman in a room full of diamonds, and come looking for her. The morning of the gala, Zara found a dress. Not bought. Found. A consignment shop on 181st Street had put a rack outside with a cardboard sign that said $5, final sale. The dress was black. Simple. Floor length with a modest neckline and long sleeves. It had a tiny rip along the hem that nobody would notice unless they were looking, and nobody ever looked at Zara long enough to notice anything. She held it against her body in the narrow aisle between the rack and the storefront window. It fit. She hadn't bought a dress in 4 years. She hadn't gone anywhere that required one. But something about the gala had gotten under her skin. Not the idea of being chosen, not the fantasy of standing before a powerful man and being seen. That wasn't it. It was simpler than that. She just wanted to be in the room. Not as a maid. Not as the woman with the mask. Just as a person. Standing. Watching. Existing in a space where beautiful things happen to other people. She bought the dress with crumpled bills from the envelope she kept behind the radiator. Her emergency fund. $5 lighter. She carried it home in a plastic bag and hung it on the back of the bathroom door. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. Just the eyes, the forehead, the head wrap. She never looked lower than the mask. She couldn't. That evening, she arrived at the Meridian 3 hours before the gala. Staff shift. She was assigned to the service kitchen, washing glasses, plating appetizers, restocking the bar stations. The main hall was transforming around her. Florists arranged cascading white orchids along the stone pillars. Lighting technicians adjusted gold-toned spots that turned the stained glass windows into something from a painting. Sound engineers tested speakers hidden in the arches. The round tables were set with black linen, gold-rimmed plates, and crystal glasses that caught the light like liquid diamonds. Zara worked in the back. Through the kitchen doors, she could hear the hum of the arriving crowd growing louder. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric. Every sound reminded her of the dress hanging in her bathroom, the dress she would never wear tonight. At 7, Monique arrived. Zara heard her before she saw her. That voice. High, sharp, commanding, cutting through the kitchen noise like a blade through silk. Where's the VIP entrance? I'm not walking through the main door with everybody else. Zara kept her head down, scrubbing a champagne glass that was already clean. Through the pass-through window between the kitchen and the hallway, she saw Monique sweep past in a red dress that looked like it cost more than 3 months of Zara's rent. Gold heels, hair pulled into a sleek updo, earrings that swung and caught the light with every step. Monique looked like she belonged in that room. Zara looked like she belonged exactly where she was, behind the kitchen doors, invisible, scrubbing glass after glass while the world happened on the other side. 20 minutes later, Monique came into the kitchen. Not to help, to inspect. She walked through like she was already Mrs. Kong, running her finger along the counter and checking it for dust. When she reached Zara, she stopped. Oh, you're here. Zara didn't look up. I'm working. Monique leaned against the counter, arms crossed, head tilted. That smile. The one that looked warm from a distance but up close was all teeth and no kindness. Good. That's exactly where you should be. Behind the scenes. Out of sight. She paused, her eyes dropping to Zara's uniform. Then her gaze caught something. The edge of a plastic bag sticking out of Zara's backpack on the shelf by the door. Monique walked over and pulled the bag open before Zara could move. The black dress spilled out. Monique held it up with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. What is this? Zara's heart hammered. It's nothing. This is a dress. Monique turned it over, examining it. A $5 consignment store dress, from the looks of it. Were you planning to wear this tonight? No. You were. Monique's voice dropped. The smile disappeared. Something colder took its place. You were going to put this on and walk into that gala, like you had any right to be there. I wasn't going to. You were going to embarrass me. Monique's hand went to the neckline of the dress. She gripped the fabric and pulled. The sound of tearing cloth echoed off the kitchen tiles. A long rip ran from the neckline to the waist. She pulled again. The sleeves separated from the body. She pulled a 3rd time, and the dress came apart in 2 pieces. Monique dropped them on the floor. Zara stared at the shredded fabric. Her throat closed. Her vision blurred. She couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The $5. The emergency fund. The tiny thread of hope she'd let herself hold for one day. All of it lay in pieces on a kitchen floor that smelled like bleach and dishwater. You're the help, Zara. Monique's voice was flat now. Clinical. Know your place. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. Her gold heels clicked against the tile, fading into the sound of the gala on the other side of the doors. Zara stood motionless. She looked down at the torn dress. She bent slowly, picked up the pieces, and folded them into the plastic bag. She put the bag back in her backpack. She turned back to the sink and picked up another glass. Her hands were shaking, but the glass didn't drop. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of hearing it shatter. An hour into the gala, Zara's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Private number. But something made her thumb swipe across the screen. Hello. I heard the big boss is picking a wife tonight. Denise's voice. That voice. Even through the phone, it hit Zara's chest like a fist. She hadn't spoken to Denise in over a year. Hadn't wanted to. Hadn't needed to. The poison had done its work long ago. Monique called me this morning, Denise continued. She's confident. I raised that girl right. She knows how to carry herself in a room full of powerful people. Zara said nothing. Her fingers gripped the phone so tight her knuckles ached. I hope you're not getting any ideas, Denise said, her tone shifting to the low, sharp register that still made Zara's blood go cold. You're there to clean, to scrub, to stay invisible. That's all you're good for. That's all you've ever been good for. The kitchen was loud around her. Pots clanging, voices shouting orders, the hiss of steam from the dishwasher. But all Zara could hear was Denise. Remember what's under that mask. No man alive would choose you. You should be grateful Monique even got you that job. Without her, you'd be on the street. Without me, you'd still be walking around thinking you were worth something. The line clicked. Denise had hung up without saying goodbye. She never said goodbye. Zara lowered the phone. Her hand trembled. She set the phone on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the steel surface, leaning forward, eyes closed, breathing through her nose. She thought about the dress in the bag. She thought about the coins scattered in the alley. She thought about the man with the sharp eyes who'd called her mask courageous. She thought about how the word had felt, like a door opening in a house she thought had no exits. She picked up the next glass and kept working. By 9 the gala was in full bloom. Zara moved between the kitchen and the service corridor carrying trays of appetizers, replacing empty champagne buckets, and clearing plates from the stations near the back wall. She was invisible, a ghost in gray moving through a sea of gold and black. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, she caught a glimpse of the main hall. The room was something out of a movie she'd never be cast in. Hundreds of guests filled the cathedral. Women in gowns that moved like water. Men in suits that cost more than cars. The orchestra played from a raised platform near the altar, their music threading through conversation and laughter. And at the center of it all, seated at the head table beneath a canopy of white orchids and gold draping, was the man everyone believed was Kang Seo-jin. Young-soo played the role perfectly. He sat in Seo-jin's charcoal suit, his posture straight, his expression controlled. He nodded at the right moments. He smiled when it was expected. He danced with each woman who approached, one song per woman, no more no less, and he studied them with the careful attention of a man who appeared to be choosing, but was really just observing. Monique had positioned herself at the table closest to the head table. She'd angled her chair so that every time Young-soo glanced in that direction, he'd see her first. She laughed louder than anyone else. She touched the arm of the woman beside her to make sure people were watching. She adjusted her earrings, her hair, her neckline, small movements designed to draw the eye. When Young-soo approached her table for a dance, Monique stood before he finished asking. She took his hand and walked to the floor like she was walking down an aisle. She danced close. Too close. Her hand on his shoulder slid to the back of his neck. She leaned in and whispered something that made her smile, but didn't change his expression at all. When the song ended, she didn't let go. He had to gently remove her hand. She laughed it off, but her eyes stayed locked on him as she walked back to her seat. Then, halfway through the second dance set, Young-soo danced with her again. A second dance. The room noticed. Whispers moved through the tables like wind through grass. He danced with her twice. Did you see? He went back to her. It must be her. Monique noticed too. She turned to the woman beside her and said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, when I'm Mrs. Kang, the first thing I'm doing is cleaning house. Starting with every ugly uniform behind those kitchen doors. Her eyes flicked toward the service entrance where Zara had just appeared with a tray. Zara caught the look. She turned away and kept moving. Meanwhile, the real Kang Seo-jin was not in the main hall. He was upstairs. The Meridian had a second level, a mezzanine that overlooked the main floor through a row of stone arches. It had been closed to guests. Seo-jin stood in the shadows, dressed now in a simple dark shirt and pants, watching the gala unfold below him. He'd changed out of the disguise in a private room on the upper floor, cleaned the dirt from his hands and face. But he hadn't put on a suit. He wasn't ready to be seen yet. From the mezzanine he could see everything. He watched Young-soo dance. He watched the women perform, their laughter a beat too loud, their smiles a shade too practiced, their eyes calculating the value of every gesture. He watched Monique lean in during the second dance, and whisper something that made Young-soo's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. And he watched the service doors. He'd been watching them all night, waiting. Every time they swung open, his eyes tracked the person who emerged. A server with champagne, a busboy with empty plates, a woman in a gray uniform and a flesh-colored mask carrying a tray of appetizers. There. His chest tightened. He leaned forward against the stone rail, his fingers gripping the edge. The mask. The head wrap. The way she moved, quiet, deliberate, trying to take up as little space as possible, like she was apologizing for existing. It was her. The woman from the alley. The woman who had knelt on cold concrete and fed him without knowing his name. The woman whose mask had slipped for 1 second, revealing a face the world had taught her to hide, and whose eyes, in that 1 second, had carried more pain than anyone in the glittering room below had ever known. He watched her clear a table near the back wall. She moved efficiently, stacking plates, wiping surfaces, replacing napkins. A guest at the next table flagged her down. A man in his 50s with a red face and a glass of scotch that wasn't his first. The man said something to her. Zara's body went rigid. From the mezzanine, Seojin couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. The man was pointing at her mask. He reached toward her face. She stepped back. He reached again, laughing. She stepped back again, her tray pressed against her chest like a shield. Is this some kind of cultural thing? The man said, loud enough now for nearby tables to hear. He flicked the edge of her mask with his finger. Because if that face is as bad as they say, maybe you should be serving from the kitchen where nobody has to see you. 2 women at his table laughed. Zara stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the floor, her fingers white around the tray. The man waved her away like she was a fly. Go on. Shoo. Seojin's knuckles went white on the stone rail. His jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed at his temple. He turned from the mezzanine and walked toward the stairs. He'd seen enough. Not enough of the performance below. Enough of something else. Enough to know that the woman carrying trays in a torn uniform had more dignity in her silence than every person in that room had in their finest clothes. He was done watching. It was time to move. The gala was 3 hours deep when it happened. Young-soo had just finished his 5th dance. The orchestra transitioned into something slower, more atmospheric. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Glasses were refilled. The room settled into the comfortable haze of expensive wine and anticipation. Everyone was waiting. The announcement. The choice. Which woman had captured the heart of Kang Seojin? Monique sat at her table with perfect posture, her chin lifted, her smile locked in place like she'd practiced it in a mirror for hours. Because she had. She'd rehearsed this moment since the day she started working at Venom. The dress. The angle. The smile. The exact amount of surprise she'd show when her name was called. Not too much. She didn't want to look desperate. Just enough to seem humble. She'd even rehearsed her walk to the head table. 12 steps. Slow. Confident. A slight pause at step 8 to let the cameras catch her profile. She'd counted. Then the side door near the orchestra opened. Not the main entrance. Not the kitchen doors. A door that led from the upper level. The mezzanine that had been closed all evening. A man stepped through. Tall. Lean. Dark shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearms. A scar ran from his right ear to his jaw. A silver streak at his left temple caught the chandelier light. He moved through the room like he owned it. Because he did. The first person to recognize him was the head of security, who straightened so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Then a guard near the bar touched his earpiece and whispered something. Then 2 more guards moved to flank the man as he walked. Young-soo saw him from the head table. He set down his glass, stood, and stepped aside without a word. The murmurs started before the man reached the center of the room. Who is that? That's not the man who was sitting at the head table. Wait, is that? That's him. That's Kang Seojin. The room cracked open with whispers. Women turned in their seats. Men set down their drinks. The orchestra stopped mid-note, the sudden silence ringing louder than any chord. Monique's rehearsed smile flickered. Her eyes narrowed. The man walking through the room was not the man she'd danced with. This was someone else. Someone she'd never seen at the club. Someone she'd never positioned herself in front of. Someone her stomach dropped. She didn't know why yet, but something was wrong. Seojin reached the center of the hall and stopped. He didn't go to the head table. He didn't address the crowd. He turned and looked directly at the service entrance. Then he walked toward it. The whispers became gasps. 300 guests watched the most powerful man on the East Coast walk past every woman in the room. Past the models, past the socialites, past the daughters of business partners and political allies, past Monique in her red dress with her practiced smile now crumbling at the edges, and head straight for the kitchen doors. Monique stood up. Baby, where are you going? Her voice carried across the silent room. She stepped into the aisle, her gold heels clicking against the stone floor. I'm right here. Seojin didn't slow down. He didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge her voice. Monique moved faster. She reached out and grabbed his arm. Her fingers closed around his forearm. He stopped. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Then he looked at her face. The same face that had leaned down in an alley and told a man with nothing that he was disgusting. The same mouth that had kicked his cup and threatened to have him dragged out by his neck. He removed her hand. Not roughly. Slowly. Deliberately. The way you remove something that doesn't belong. He continued walking. Monique stood alone in the aisle. The entire room was watching her. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. Her hand hung in the air where his arm had been. Fingers still curled around the shape of something that was already gone. Jean pushed through the kitchen doors. The fluorescent lights hit his face. 3 line cooks froze mid-motion. A dishwasher dropped a plate. The kitchen manager started to speak, but Jean raised one hand and the room went silent. He scanned the kitchen. Left to right. Past the stoves. Past the prep stations. Past the walk-in cooler. And there, in the far corner, standing at a sink with her back to the room, scrubbing a pot with both hands, was Zara. The mask. The head wrap. The gray uniform. Shoulders that carried the weight of a life that had tried to crush her and hadn't managed it yet. "Excuse me," Jean said. His voice was quiet. Steady. Every person in the kitchen heard it anyway. Zara turned around. The pot slipped from her hands and splashed back into the sink. Water spotted her uniform. She didn't notice. She was looking at his face. The jaw. The scar from right ear to jaw. The eyes sharp focused, watching her with something that made her breath catch. She knew those eyes. She'd seen them in the dark. In an alley. Behind grime and a grimy baseball cap. Above a paper cup with scattered coins. Her lips parted behind the mask. "You," she whispered. "Me," he said. "The man you fed in the alley. The man you gave water. The man whose cup someone else kicked." He paused. "The man you sat next to on cold concrete when no one else stopped." The kitchen was dead silent. Every cook, every dishwasher, every server who'd left a note on her locker or refused to eat lunch beside her stood frozen, watching. "There is a room full of women out there," Jean said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision already made. "Women in gowns. Women with connections. Women who spent months positioning themselves to be in that room tonight." He took one step closer to her. "I don't want any of them." Zara couldn't breathe. Her wet hands dripped onto the floor. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard, she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "I came here for you," he said. "Come with me." "I can't," she whispered. "Why not? Look at me." Her voice broke. "I'm in a uniform. I'm Soukung Veterinaria. I have a mask on my face and scars underneath that would make you." "I've seen them," he said quietly. "The alley. The door. The strap broke. I saw." Her body went still. The air left her lungs. He'd seen. He'd known this whole time. "And I'm still here," he said. "I didn't come for a face, Zara. I came for a heart. And yours is the only one in this building worth choosing." She stared at him. Her eyes burned. Her chin trembled behind the mask. She couldn't move. Jean extended his hand. Palm up. Open. Waiting. The kitchen was silent. The cooks who'd ignored her. The servers who'd whispered about her. The dishwasher who'd never once said good morning. All of them watched the most powerful man on the East Coast stand in their kitchen with his hand out, waiting for the masked maid to take it. Zara looked down at his hand. She looked at her own. Wet, wrinkled, smelling like dish soap and bleach. She reached out. Her fingers touched his palm. He closed his hand around hers. And he led her through the kitchen doors into the gala, into the light, into a room full of 300 people who had never once looked at her. And every single one of them was looking now. The kitchen doors swung open, and Zara stepped into the light. 300 heads turned at once. The silence that hit the room was so complete she could hear the wax dripping from the candles on the nearest table. She was still in her gray uniform. Still wet from the sink. Still wearing the mask. Her hand was inside Jean's, and his grip was firm. Not pulling her, not dragging her, just holding. Like an anchor. Like a promise that if she fell, he'd fall with her. The orchestra had stopped. The servers had frozen mid-step. Champagne went flat in glasses nobody was drinking anymore. Every pair of eyes in the meridian followed the masked maid as she walked beside the most powerful man on the East Coast through a room designed for women who looked nothing like her. The whispers started almost immediately. That's the maid. The one with the mask? He chose her. Is this a joke? Zara heard every word. They landed on her skin like sparks. Her instinct screamed at her to pull her hand free, to turn and run back through the kitchen doors, to disappear into the service elevator and ride it down to the street where she belonged. But Seojin's thumb moved against her knuckle. A small, slow circle. Steady. Deliberate. She stayed. He led her to the center of the room, directly beneath the largest chandelier, where the light was brightest and there was nowhere to hide. He turned to face her. Then he turned to face the room. My name is Kang Seojin, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but the acoustics of the cathedral carried every syllable to every corner. Most of you have never seen my face before tonight. The man who sat at the head table, who danced with you, who listened to your stories and your laughter. That was Yangsu, my second in command, my brother in all but blood. The room erupted. Gasps cascaded through the tables like dominoes falling. Women turned to each other with wide eyes. Men leaned forward in their chairs. At the table closest to the head table, Monique's face drained of every ounce of color. Her lips moved but no sound came out. She looked at Yangsu, who stood beside the head table with his arms folded and his expression unchanged. The man she'd danced with. The man she'd whispered to. The man she'd told her friends she was going to marry. He wasn't Seojin. He'd never been Seojin. I didn't come to the gala tonight, Seojin continued. I spent the evening before this event in the alley behind this building, dressed in torn clothes, sitting on cold concrete with a paper cup and a few coins, looking like the kind of man the world throws away. He paused. Let the image settle. I wanted to see what people do when there is nothing to gain. When the man in front of them has no name, no money, no power. When kindness has no reward. His eyes moved slowly across the room, table by table, face by face. 46 people passed me. Not one stopped. Some stepped over my legs. Some cursed at me. One woman, his eyes found Monique. She sat rigid in her chair, her red dress suddenly looking too bright, like a warning sign. One woman kicked my cup, scattered my coins into a puddle, told me I was disgusting, told me I was ruining the vibe for the gala, threatened to have me dragged out by my neck. The room turned to follow his gaze. 300 pairs of eyes landed on Monique. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing came out. A woman at the next table slid her chair slightly away from Monique, as if cruelty were something you could catch by proximity. And then, Seojin said, his voice softening, at midnight the service door opened. And a woman I'd never met stepped into the alley carrying trash bags. She saw me. She knelt on the concrete in front of me. She asked if I was okay. She asked when I'd last eaten. He turned to Zara. She was trembling. Her eyes were locked on the floor. Her wet hands hung at her sides. She went inside and brought me food, sat beside me on cold ground while I ate, told me to take small bites so my stomach wouldn't cramp. His voice caught on the last word. Not much. Just enough that the people closest to him noticed his jaw tighten, noticed him swallow before continuing. She didn't know my name. Didn't know I owned this building. Didn't know anything about me except that I was hungry and alone. And she stopped. She was the only one. Silence. Total, ringing absolute silence. Zara could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing against her. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. But Seojin's hand was still holding hers, and his thumb was still drawing that slow, steady circle against her knuckle. This is the woman I choose, he said. Not a question. Not a proposal. A declaration made in front of 300 witnesses beneath a chandelier that costs more than most people's houses. Not for her face. Not for her name. Not for her status. For her heart. The room held its breath. Then, from the back of the hall, someone started clapping. Slow. Deliberate. One pair of hands. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. The applause grew until it filled the cathedral like thunder, bouncing off the stone arches and the stained glass windows and the gold leaf ceiling. But Monique wasn't clapping. She was standing. Her chair scraped backward against the stone floor, the sound cutting through the applause like a knife. Her eyes were wild. Her chest heaved. The careful composure she'd maintained all evening had shattered, and what was underneath was raw and ugly and desperate. You're choosing her? Her voice cracked through the room. The applause died. The masked freak who scrubs your toilets? Who can't even show her face in public? You're picking a scarred-up maid over me. She stepped into the aisle. Her gold heels clicked against the stone. Her finger pointed at Zara like a weapon. You don't know what's under that mask. You don't know what she looks like. She's hideous. My mother made sure of that. The last sentence landed like a grenade. The room went from silent to airless. Made sure of that. 3 words that changed everything. Seojin's eyes narrowed. His hand tightened around Zara's. What did you say? His voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that people in his world knew to fear. Monique's face shifted. The rage was still there, but now fear was climbing up behind it, and she couldn't take the words back. They were out, floating in the cathedral air, settling into the ears of 300 witnesses. I didn't mean. You said your mother made sure of it. Seojin took 1 step toward her. Made sure of what? Monique's mouth opened and closed. Her hands twisted together in front of her stomach. The red dress that had made her feel powerful 2 hours ago now felt like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Every person in the room was staring at her. She could feel their eyes like heat. It was she fell, Monique stammered. When she was young, she fell and hit her face. It was an accident. My mother she tried to help. She put medicine on the wound. She was trying to poison her. A new voice. From the back of the room. Every head turned. The crowd near the main entrance parted. A woman walked through. Mid-50s. Brown skin. Church dress. Pearl earrings. Hands clasped in front of her like she was heading to Sunday service. But her eyes were hard. Hard and bright and filled with something that looked like victory. Denise Thornton. She hadn't been invited to the gala. She'd come anyway. She'd heard Monique slip on the phone. Her daughter had called her in a panic 5 minutes ago, whispering that something had gone wrong, that the real Seojin had appeared, that he'd chosen the maid, and Denise had gotten in a car and driven from Baltimore to Manhattan in 3 hours and 40 minutes, breaking every speed limit on I-95. She walked through the room like she owned it. Her heels were sensible. Her posture was straight. She had the calm, controlled energy of a woman who had spent decades managing situations, managing perceptions, managing the truth. My daughter misspoke, Denise said smoothly, stopping 10 feet from Seojin. Zara had an accident as a child. A fall. I cared for her. I treated her wounds with traditional remedies. It's unfortunate that the scarring was so severe, but I did everything I could. Her voice was warm, practiced. The churchwoman voice. The voice that had fooled the police. The voice that had fooled the neighbors. The voice that had fooled Curtis. Seojin studied her. His eyes moved over her face the way they moved over a contract, reading what was written and what was hidden between the lines. Traditional remedies, he repeated. Yes. Herbal ointments. Natural healing compounds. I applied them every week for years to help the scars heal. Every week, Seojin said. For years. That's correct. And yet the scars didn't heal. Denise's smile didn't waver. Some wounds are beyond medicine, Mr. Kong. Surely you understand that. Seojin turned to one of his guards and said something in Korean. The guard nodded and left the room. He turned back to Denise. I understand a great deal, Mrs. Thornton. I understand that industrial-grade chemical burns don't come from falling on a floor. I understand that scars from a childhood accident don't remain inflamed and raw 8 years later, unless something is actively preventing them from healing. The warmth drained from Denise's face by degrees, like watching a candle die. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what a dermatologist told me 3 hours ago when I described the scarring pattern I saw on Zara's face in the alley. He'd had it analyzed. In the 24 hours since the alley, he'd called the best burn specialist in Manhattan, described exactly what he'd seen in that 1-second glimpse when the mask slipped, and asked a single question. Could this be caused by a childhood fall? The answer had been unequivocal. No. The scarring pattern was consistent with a direct chemical application, and the continued inflammation suggested ongoing exposure to an irritant compound. Someone had been poisoning the wound. Deliberately. Repeatedly. For years. Denise's composure cracked. Not all at once. A fissure first, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Then wider, her eyes darting left, looking for an exit. Then wider still. Her hands separating, fingers spreading, the clasped in prayer pose dissolving into something that looked more like surrender. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice had lost its smoothness. I raised that girl. I fed her. I clothed her. I gave her a home after her father died. You gave her a mask, Seojin said. And you told her she was a monster. Denise caught herself. But not fast enough. The word hung in the air, half-formed, its meaning fully complete. The room heard it. Zara heard it. Standing behind Seojin, still in her gray uniform, still wet, still trembling. She heard the woman who burned her almost say it again. She is a monster. The same words. The same voice. The same woman. 8 years later and nothing had changed inside Denise Thornton. Please. Monique stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she'd spent 2 hours applying. Please don't. She's my mother. I know what she did was wrong. I've always known. She turned to the room, then back to Seojin, her hands clasped together. It's true. It's all true. Mama didn't just try to help. She caused it. The night after Daddy Curtis's funeral, 3 days after. Zara was sleeping. Mama held her down. She had a rag soaked in something from a man on Route 40. Some kind of acid or industrial cleaner. She pressed it into Zara's face. She held it there while Zara screamed. The room made a sound. Not gasps. Something lower. Something guttural. The sound of 300 people processing horror at the same time. Monique kept going. The words pouring out like something that had been locked in a box for 8 years, and the hinges had finally rusted through. And after that, every week, she told Zara she was putting medicine on the scars to help them heal. But it wasn't medicine. It was more of the same stuff. Different mix. Weaker. But enough to keep the skin raw. Enough to make sure the scars never faded. She wanted Zara ugly. She wanted her hidden. She wanted me to be the pretty one. Monique's voice broke on the last word. She sank to her knees on the stone floor, her red dress pooling around her like blood. I watched. Every week. I watched my mother rub that poison into Zara's face, and I never said a word. I never told anyone. I never stopped her. Because it meant I got to be the one people looked at. I got the clothes. I got the compliments. I got to walk down the street without people staring. She looked at Zara. Her mascara had carved black rivers down both cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Zara. I knew. I always knew. And I let her do it because it made my life easier. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Heavier than the stone arches. Heavier than the chandelier. Heavier than 300 bodies sitting in 300 chairs, not one of them breathing. Zara stood motionless. Tears soaked the inside of her mask, pooling against the material, warm and wet against the scars underneath. Her body shook with sobs she refused to let out. She'd suspected. For years, she'd suspected that the ointment wasn't healing her. But suspecting and knowing are different countries. And hearing Monique say it out loud, in front of hundreds of people, in a room full of light and music and beauty, transported her to a place she'd spent 8 years trying to leave. She was 18 again. Pinned to the bed. Denise's weight on her chest. The smell of chemicals. The burning. The screaming. The long, endless silence afterward when she realized no one was coming to help. Denise's face had gone gray. She looked at her daughter kneeling on the floor, at the room full of strangers who now knew her secret, at the man standing in front of her whose eyes held no warmth and no mercy. I'd do it again, Denise said. The words came out flat. Exhausted. Like she'd been holding them behind her teeth for 8 years, and was finally too tired to keep them there. Her father loved her face more than he loved my daughter. Everywhere we went. Oh, look at Zara. Look at those cheekbones. Look at that skin. She looks just like Lorraine. Like my Monique was invisible. Like she didn't exist. Like she wasn't good enough just because her skin wasn't as smooth, her eyes weren't as wide, her smile wasn't as bright. Denise's voice cracked. Not with remorse. With rage. Old, calcified, 8-year-old rage that had never cooled. So I removed the problem. I took the thing everyone loved about her, and I burned it off. And I'd burn it again. Because at least for 8 years, my daughter got to be seen. Seo-jin stared at her for a long moment. His face showed nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the people in the back rows leaned forward to hear. You burned a child's face because she was too beautiful. You poisoned her skin for years. You made her believe she was a monster. You stole her reflection. He paused. In my world, people who hurt the defenseless don't get second chances. He turned to the guard who had returned to his side. Take them both. Call Detective Juan. Turn over the dermatologist's report. Aggravated assault. Chemical battery. Child abuse. 8 years of evidence. The guards moved forward. Denise didn't resist. She walked between them with her chin up. Her pearl earrings catching the light. Her churchwoman posture intact even as she passed through a room of people who were looking at her the way the world had looked at Zara for the last 8 years. With horror, with pity, and with the particular kind of revulsion reserved for people who destroy beautiful things on purpose. Monique was lifted from the floor by 2 guards. She didn't fight. Her body was limp, her face swollen, her red dress wrinkled and stained with tears and mascara. As they led her past Zara, she stopped. The guards let her. I stole your tips, Monique whispered. Every month. I took money from your locker. And I told the staff your scars were contagious. That's why nobody would eat with you. Why nobody would touch you. I told them they could catch it. Zara's eyes widened behind the mask. The lunches alone. The gloves. The guard who dropped her key card on the floor instead of handing it to her. The notes on her locker. All of it. Monique. I wanted you invisible, Monique said, her voice barely audible. Because every time someone looked at you, even with the mask, they saw something I couldn't compete with. And I hated you for it. The guards led her away. The room watched them go. The gala was over. The guests had left. The orchestra had packed their instruments. The candles had burned to stubs. The meridian was quiet, the deep, exhausted quiet of a room that had held too many emotions in one night, and was finally allowed to rest. Zara sat on the edge of the stage near the altar. Her feet dangled. Her gray uniform had dried stiff in patches. The mask was still on. Seo-jin sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. The same way she'd sat beside him in the alley, close enough that his shoulder touched hers. They'd been sitting in silence for 20 minutes. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, because it's already saying everything. I didn't know, Zara finally said. Her voice was hoarse from the tears she'd swallowed. About the poison. I suspected. Sometimes the ointment burned more than it should have. Sometimes the scars felt worse after she applied it, not better. But she was my stepmother. She was supposed to be taking care of me. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. Seo-jin didn't interrupt. He sat still, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the stone floor in front of them, listening. After my dad died, she was the only person I had, Zara continued. Her and Monique. I didn't have aunts or uncles or grandparents. It was just them. And I thought, if I just worked hard enough, if I was quiet enough, if I stayed out of the way and didn't complain and did everything she asked, eventually she'd love me. Eventually she'd stop being angry. She paused. She never stopped. No, Seo-jin said quietly. She didn't. How did you know? Zara asked. About the chemicals. About the poison. You saw my face for 1 second in the alley. 1 second was enough, he said. The scarring pattern wasn't consistent with an accident or a fall. The inflammation was too active for a wound that was 8 years old. Scars that old should be faded. Settled. Yours looked fresh. Like something was keeping them alive. He turned his head to look at her. I called a specialist the next morning. Described what I saw. He confirmed it before I finished talking. Zara's hands gripped the edge of the stage. Her knuckles turned pale. So when you came to the kitchen tonight, you already knew. I knew someone had hurt you. I didn't know who. I didn't know the full story. But I knew the wound on your face wasn't an accident. And I knew the woman wearing it deserved better than a life spent hiding. The silence returned. This time it was softer. Less heavy. More like a blanket than a weight. I'm afraid to take it off, Zara whispered. The mask? I've worn it for 8 years. I don't know what I look like underneath it anymore. The last time someone saw my face, really saw it, they ran. A date. 11 minutes. He couldn't even finish his drink. I won't run, Seojin said. You don't know that. I sat in a cold alley for 6 hours waiting to see if a single person in this city had a decent heart. You were the only one. I'm not running from anything about you. Zara's chin trembled. Her fingers rose to the edges of the mask. She touched the elastic, traced the seam where it met her skin. Her hands were shaking so hard the mask vibrated against her face. You don't have to, he said. Not tonight. Not ever. Not until you're ready. I want to, she said. I need to. I've been hiding for 8 years. Behind the mask. Behind the uniform. Behind silence. I let Denise convince me that what's under here is too ugly to exist in the world. I let her make me invisible. Her voice steadied. Something in it hardened, not with anger, but with decision. I don't want to be invisible anymore. She gripped both sides of the mask. Her fingers curled under the edges, pressing against the scarred skin beneath. She could feel the ridges. The valleys. The tight, twisted landscape that Denise had carved into the face her father called a miracle. She pulled. The elastic stretched. The mask separated from her skin with a soft sound, like a band-aid peeling from a wound that had been covered too long. Cool air hit her face. All of it. Every inch. The scars. The collapsed nostril. The lip that pulled sideways. The ridges that ran from her hairline to her jaw. The face she hadn't shown another human being in 8 years. She held the mask in her lap. Her eyes stayed closed. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't bear to see the change in his expression. The flicker of shock, the involuntary pull backward, the careful rearrangement of his features into something that pretended to be okay with what he was seeing. She waited for it. The way she'd waited for it every time someone got too close. The flinch. The silence. The polite excuse to leave. Instead, she felt his hand on her chin. Gentle. Warm. He turned her face toward him. Open your eyes, he said. She did. He was looking at her. Not at the scars. At her. His expression hadn't changed. There was no shock. No pity. No carefully managed neutrality. Just the same steady, focused gaze he'd had in the alley when she'd handed him a bottle of water on cold concrete. This is not your true face, he said. The poison did this. It will heal. The specialist I called, he's one of the best in the country. He said the damage is reversible. With the right treatment, with time, your real face will come back. He paused. His thumb moved across her scarred cheek, slowly, carefully, tracing the ridges the way a person traces the map of a place they intend to stay. But even if it doesn't, he said, even if this is your face for the rest of your life, I choose you. I chose you in the alley before I ever saw the scars. I chose you in the kitchen when you were soaking wet in a gray uniform. And I choose you now. Not despite this face. Not in spite of it. I choose the woman who wears it. Because the kind of heart you carry is the rarest thing I've ever encountered. And I am not letting it walk out of my life. Zara broke. Not slowly. Not gracefully. She broke the way a dam breaks when it's been holding back 8 years of water. The tears came so fast they blurred her vision. Her body shook. Her shoulders heaved. Sounds came out of her that she didn't recognize. Deep, guttural sobs that came from a place beneath language, beneath thought, beneath everything she'd built to survive. She cried for the 18-year-old girl pinned to a bed. She cried for the burning. She cried for every morning she'd looked in the mirror and turned away. She cried for every note on her locker. Every lunch eaten alone. Every date that lasted 11 minutes. Every time she'd been told, by Denise, by Monique, by the world, that what she was wasn't enough. And she cried because someone had finally looked at all of it, the scars, the mask, the pain, the hiding, and said, I choose you anyway. Seojin didn't tell her to stop. He didn't say it was okay. He didn't offer empty comfort or hollow promises. He put his arm around her, pulled her close, and let her cry into his chest until his shirt was soaked and her body had nothing left to give. They sat like that for a long time. The cathedral was empty. The candles had gone out. Manhattan hummed outside the stone walls, indifferent and enormous. The mask sat in Zara's lap. She looked down at it. The flesh-colored material. The elastic straps worn thin from 8 years of use. The slight discoloration where her tears had soaked through from the inside, night after night after night. She set it on the stage beside her. Then she stood up. She didn't put it back on. Seojin stood with her. He took her hand. They walked out of the meridian together. No mask. No uniform. No hiding. The February air hit her bare face and she flinched. Not from the cold, but from the exposure. The feeling of the world seeing her unfiltered for the first time in almost a decade. But she kept walking. Head up. Hand in his. The scars visible under the streetlights. The first week, the best burn specialist in the country flew in from Los Angeles. He examined her face for 2 hours. He confirmed what Seojeon's consultant had said. The damage was chemical, deliberately maintained, and reversible with aggressive treatment. The healing began. Creams. Procedures. Time. By the 3rd week, the inflammation had receded. By the 6th week, smooth skin began appearing beneath the fading scars. Patches of the deep brown complexion that Curtis had loved, emerging like land after a flood. By the 8th week, Zara woke up one morning in the penthouse bedroom Seojeon had given her. Silk curtains, soft bed, 3 women on staff who called her ma'am and meant it, and walked to the bathroom mirror. She looked. The scars were gone. Her face, her real face, had come back. High cheekbones. Wide-set eyes. Full lips. Skin like polished bronze. The face her father had held between his rough, cracked hands every night and called a miracle. She touched her cheek. Smooth. Warm. Hers. It's me, she whispered. I'm back. She didn't put the mask on that morning. Or the next morning. Or any morning after that. Denise and Monique were charged with aggravated assault, chemical battery, and 8 years of documented abuse. The dermatologist's report. Monique's public confession in front of 300 witnesses. The chemical supplier on Route 40 who cooperated for a reduced sentence. The case was airtight. They awaited trial. Everything they had. Which wasn't much, because everything they'd ever had was built on the suffering of a girl who deserved better, was gone. Zara married Seojeon on a Sunday in April. The ceremony was small. The meridian again, but this time with sunlight streaming through the stained glass instead of candlelight. Yongsoo stood as best man, his flat expression cracking exactly once when Seojeon said his vows. Zara wore white. No mask. Her face, her real healed beautiful face, was bare for every person in the room to see. When Seojeon took her hands before the officiant, he leaned in and whispered the same words he'd said in the alley, in the kitchen, on the stage, and every day since. I didn't choose your face. I chose your heart. And I'd choose it again. Every time. Zara squeezed his hands and smiled. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes and doesn't need permission. The kind that Denise had tried to burn away and couldn't. Because some things, the things that really matter, don't live on the surface. They live deeper than chemicals can reach. Deeper than cruelty can carve. Deeper than masks can hide. And no one can ever take them away. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments and inspire others.